Hello and welcome to the fifth part of Dr. Anne Baring's webinar, The Path to Union with the Divine Ground. And today is the summing up session. So let's hear from you, dear Anne.
Thank you, Georgia, and greetings to everyone. It's very sad it's coming to an end. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. It's been a lot of work, but I have enjoyed it. So now, wait a minute, I have to do what I have to do. Click share. Oh, the damn thing's changed. Webinar 5, that's it. Is it showing up properly with you? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
As all of you know, this is a time of great peril, not only from the coronavirus, but from the harm we've done to the earth and from the threat of nuclear weapons. We need to look below the surface of our unconscious culture to find out why we have lost touch with nature, why we have learned so little from these four spiritual traditions, that we are prepared to destroy God's creation with our terrible weapons. This applies to India and China, as well as to the West. The Gnostic teaching about the indwelling spirit that I spoke about last time survived and was transmitted to alchemy. The alchemists knew that each one of us carries the potential of the royal value or fully awakened consciousness, symbolized by the mysterious stone or gold. There was a resurgence also of the divine feminine in the Middle Ages, specifically in the image of the Holy Grail, which was a cipher for the feminine Holy Spirit. And there is another resurgence of the feminine today in the growing awareness of the urgent need to change our relationship with the planet and with each other, to overcome our ancient habits of rivalry. I'm going to start with the great work of alchemy because it's relevant to what's happening in the world. Christianity has taught that the Redeemer is outside us and that our ultimate redemption as Christians has been assured by Christ's sacrificial death. Alchemy taught that we can become the redeemer or rescuer of the lost aspect of his spirit, hidden within each one of us and within nature, working with spirit to accomplish this awakening within us. In other words, we can restore the divinity to nature that was lost through our alienation from it. This gives great significance to the individual, since the divine drama of redemption is consummated in and through us. It is an awesome and heroic task. Each one of us carries the mystery of the incarnation of spirit in this dimension. Alchemy is a sacred rite of unification, an opus divinum, which ultimately reveals our innate divinity as son and daughter of God. Humanity is now going through an alchemical Nigredo, a descent into the underworld, as in the great myths of earlier civilizations, a harrowing experience that may help us to alter the path we are on and reconnect us with the earth and the cosmos. It is a confrontation with death, with grief, and with loss. It is essential for us to make this descent if there is to be a change in collective consciousness. The Nigredo is the first stage in a profound alchemical process of transformation, a call to awaken. The wheat growing out of the grave in the picture below signifies regeneration after death, as do the seeds that a man is sowing. So this is a picture about death and regeneration and goes back to the ancient myths of the ancient world. The second stage of alchemy is called the albedo, or solutio. It's about the opening of the heart, the shedding of tears, discovering our limitless capacity to love in the service of life, the dawning of insight, illumination, and wisdom. It is about reconnecting with the feminine, with the soul, with the heart. And its symbols are the queen, the moon, moonlight, the white stone or rose, the lily, the dove, and the swan. So here are some of the pictures all around: the flowers, the moon, and the vessel with the queen in it. The great work of alchemy was about restoring our lost relationship with the divine ground. It is about the creation of an immortal body of light, the integration of body, soul, and spirit, and the conscious reunion with the unus mundus, or the divine ground of being. And this reunion was known as the sacred marriage, and it's symbolized by the figure in the beautiful painting on the left, the male and the female coming together, and reflected in their mirror is the landscape that's all around them. I can't go into the explanation, but just look at the beauty of that picture. And this is what somebody in the early 16th century painted, who lived in Germany, near Augsburg. Now, we have seen that the teachers of all the four paths to union spoke of our essential, divine, immortal nature and the path to the experience of it, just as the alchemists did much later on. The Hindu rishis gave us the Atman and Brahman. The Buddha Siddhartha gave us our Buddha nature. Lao Tzu gave us the Tao, and Jesus, the kingdom of heaven. They're all speaking of the same higher level of consciousness in different language, in different words. And that lotus symbolizes the growth of this consciousness from the mud of the earth underneath into the flowering, or the final flowering of this consciousness. Now, the positive legacy of these four traditions was that all four inspired the most sublime art, particularly architecture, sculpture, and painting. All four brought specific gifts to humanity. Hinduism gave us the peerless teaching of the Vedas and Upanishads and the indwelling Atman. The Buddha gave us the teaching about compassion and our Buddha nature. Taoism gave us the need for a profound relationship with nature and great wisdom. And Jesus gave us the emphasis on love and healing and the awareness of our innate divinity, the kingdom of heaven within us. And this is to recapitulate the teaching of the Upanishads in Hinduism, that all life derives from a primal one, so all life is a unity. Brahman is the supreme creator, present in every atom of life. There is nothing outside Brahman or God. The material world is a manifestation of divine spirit, so all life is sacred, all life is divine. The physical universe is the body of God, or Brahman. This is the underlying concept of Advaita, or non-duality. God did not so much create the world, he became the world, said Ramakrishna. So divinity is present as the Atman in each individual soul. And non-violence is the logical extension of non-duality because it embodies sensitivity to and respect for others and for all species. Now that was the essential gift or teaching of Hinduism. But look where it is today. So the shadow aspect of Hinduism is something we need to look at. First of all, deeply embedded in Hindu thought is the idea that matter is inferior to spirit, although this contradicts the principle of non-duality. Secondly, there's the concept of Maya and the idea that the world of physical reality is an illusion. We should seek release from bondage to earth through the experience of moksha or enlightenment. I'll come to the shadow at the end of my talk. You'll see what I mean by that. Asceticism and the idea that the body is inferior to spirit was part of this shadow. Denying the body helps us to be more spiritual. The spiritual path is therefore world-renouncing, not world-embracing or celebrating. That's very important to remember. Women are inferior to men because they are closer to nature and share nature's inferior status. Note the prevalence of rape in India, more than any other country in the world except South Africa. Of all the different approaches to spirituality in India, only Tantra fully integrates women, the body, and nature with spirit. Then we come to Buddhism. We have the emphasis on compassion. We have the emphasis on reincarnation, samsara, and the working out of karma through many, many lives, thousands of lives. Contemplation and meditation as paths to realization. Non-violence and the realization of the Buddha nature. And the Buddha nature of rocks and trees, which I forgot to mention in my talk on Buddhism. The interdependence of all life. No killing of animals to feed humans. But there is the shadow, which we've seen in Myanmar with the attempt to exterminate the Rohingya, which was a shocking example of what Buddhism can degenerate into when it's taken over by the military or by whoever wants to get rid of some other people. And I saw pictures of Buddhist monks saying that this is a very good thing to exterminate the Rohingya, that they're a perfect pest to have them in Myanmar. So it's definitely Buddhist monks have been saying that. Both Hinduism and Buddhism emphasize the need for release from the spell of Maya and from samsara, or the chain of causation and the wheel of rebirth. So, in effect, theirs appears to be an up and out cosmology with no apparent desire to remain on this planet, but rather to seek release from it. I'm going to come back to this at the end because it's a very important idea. Then we come to Taoism. All life emanates from a primal ground, not a primal God figure. Taoism, like Hinduism, did not separate matter from spirit. It had a profound and respectful relationship with nature and the body. It had the balance and interaction of yin and yang, the feminine and masculine principles. And its attitude to women showed great respect for them. It emphasized non-violence and self-realization, like the other religions, and respect for the body with very effective methods of healing, such as acupuncture, qigong, and the inner work of Neigong. So Taoism was not an up-and-out cosmology, although, like alchemy, it prepared a subtle body for life beyond death. Now we come to Christianity, which I'm spending a bit of time on. We have the teaching of Jesus, emphasis on love and non-violence, and the kingdom of heaven being within everyone. So everyone is essentially a son or daughter of God. Then we have the teaching of the Christian church in contrast, whereas belonging to the church and accepting its teaching is the path to the kingdom of heaven. There's the emphasis on sin and guilt derived from the fall of man. Original sin was transmitted to each generation through the sexual act. If you want to know more about that, you can look on Google because there's a lot of material there, which I can't go into here, but it's an extraordinarily complicated idea that was originated with St. Augustine in the 5th century, early 5th century AD. And I think it was a total and utter disaster and has contaminated Christianity from the beginning. So we have God as the primal creator and Jesus as the only Son of God. We have the desacralization of nature and matter being inferior to spirit, contaminated by the fall. We have the divine mandate to rule the earth coming from the book of Genesis. So the earth is not our true home, but a place to which we have been exiled because of the sin of Adam and Eve. Again, this is an up and out cosmology. When the image of deity changed from Great Mother to Great Father around 2000 BC, roughly, give or take 1,000 years, divine immanence was lost because the emphasis was on the transcendence of God or spirit. So earth became a place of exile and punishment for primordial sin. Man was given dominion over the earth, but he was no longer part of the divine order. He lived in a world contaminated by the fall and subject to sin, suffering, and death. This is a simply dreadful idea to give to people, and it's gone now on for a very long time. It's time it came to an end, I think. So the myth gave us a very negative image of our presence here. It inflicted, in my view, a trauma on us from which we have never recovered, and it gave rise to an unconscious will to power over life. I'm spending more time on Christianity because we've been profoundly influenced by its teaching, in the West at least. So the Christian image of God or Spirit separated the Creator from creation by opening an abyss between them and between the masculine and feminine archetypes. The masculine archetype became associated with spirit, and the feminine archetype became associated with nature. Matter was regarded as inferior to spirit, and women were regarded as closer to nature and therefore inferior to and subject to men. It's also clear the way it was believed in. This world was presented as a fallen world, contaminated by sin. Nature was no longer experienced as sacred as it had been in the cultures which preceded patriarchy, and spirit was no longer immanent in nature. Kabbalah, as I've said many times, was the only cosmology in the West that held the image of the indissoluble union between the masculine and feminine aspects of the Godhead and between creator and creation. There were outstanding exceptions. For example, St. Francis, who was very close to nature, who spoke to the birds, who spent a lot of time speaking about Brother Sun and Sister Moon. We also have Hildegard of Bingen, who was tremendously gifted as a healer and worked a lot with healing herbs and plants. We have Meister Eckhart, who was an extraordinary mystic who just escaped the Inquisition. We have Jakob Boehme, who was another amazing, extraordinary man. And we have the alchemists. So there were exceptions to this belief systems, and all of them escaped being killed by the Inquisition by some miracle. Now, the priesthoods of the principal world religions promoted a world-negating, not a world-embracing cosmology. Hinduism and Buddhism emphasized release from the deceptive spell of Maya and the wheel of rebirth. Christianity emphasized the sinfulness and helplessness of man in a fallen world. It separated creation from the Creator and did not see nature as a manifestation of spirit. God was transcendent, not immanent in creation. The only Son of God was seen as the Redeemer of Christians, not the whole of humanity. And this pitted religions against each other in sibling rivalry. It inflated Christians and aroused envy and hatred in other traditions. It promoted the conversion of supposedly inferior races to Christianity. And these beliefs, over time, led gradually to a de-souling of the world and the value of human existence. I'm going to repeat that line. These beliefs led gradually to a de-souling of the world and the value of human existence. The only exception is Taoism, which embraced nature and the body and the miracle of life and existence in this world. The spiritual path was a world-renouncing one, where the body was seen as the main impediment to the spiritual life. Matter was not part of spirit. This led to asceticism, celibacy, and to the demonization and fear of sexuality and women, and to guilt and shame. Body was inferior to mind and soul. Destroying the body in war was acceptable, and the idea of the just war came in with St. Augustine. Women, being closer to nature, were inferior to and subject to men, as I've said before. And I think the moral failure of all religions is reflected in the consistent and continued rape of women. And I would urge any of you who are interested in this subject to get Christina Lamb's new book, which is called Our Bodies, Their Battlefield. It's a horrific account of what women have had to experience for thousands of years, but particularly even in this last century and this one. The patriarchal priesthoods, and they were all patriarchal, put their emphasis on faith, belief, and belonging to an institution. They still do. They did not teach respect for woman, for the body, and for the earth and all its species. I think Pope Francis has reversed that in his marvelous encyclical in Laudato Si 2 or 3 years ago, but I think he's the first person to have done that in Christianity. So I think this explains why and how in a worldwide culture we've come to believe that it doesn't matter what we do to matter, that nature and matter are not part of spirit and we are not part of spirit. The influence of up and out cosmologies and the total absence of the divine feminine in them explains why we are no longer aware that the earth is part of a sacred cosmic order, as we once were in lunar culture, presided over by the Great Mother and the Goddess. This may be why, in spite of enlightened teachers and these spiritual paths, we are still morally immature or unconscious, why we have forgotten or ignored the teaching that all life is sacred. We have also forgotten or ignored this because of the power of unconscious survival instincts that control the ego and the reality it constructs and becomes enmeshed in and are addicted to. And this is what Hinduism and Buddhism meant by Maya, I think. For millennia, survival instincts have driven the rulers of nations to pursue the goals of power, dominance, and control, rather than relationship, service of the planet, and care for all aspects of life. In the pursuit of power, the sacrifice of young men in war over some 4,000 years became acceptable, justifiable, even admirable. The compulsion to destroy those who are different. Deeply unconscious survival instincts have led us to see other ethnic groups and other beliefs as a threat to ourselves and to persecute people with barbaric cruelty. Christianity deliberately destroyed the pagan religions and the Gnostics, and from the 4th to the 18th century, it tortured and murdered heretics. From the 16th century to the present day, it has tried to convert the indigenous peoples with appalling cruelty. In the Christian West, we've had the persecution of the Jews, culminating in the Holocaust. In India, there's the caste system and the shocking persecution of the Dalits, or untouchables, as well as the ethnic tension between Hindus and Muslims, which has been aggravated by the present Prime Minister. In China, the Soviet Union, and Cambodia under communism, we had the elimination of class enemies with horrific suffering. And Islam, which I haven't included at all, the recent attempt by Islamic State to take control of the world in the name of Allah. So you can see how these survival instincts can drive us to these acts of unparalleled barbarity. Now, the gaping hole in up and out cosmologies is that they fail to answer the fundamental questions. What is the purpose of the physical universe? And why is life on Earth something we should try to escape from? What is the purpose of our lives on this planet? Why are we here? Are we a sinful, fallen species, or are we part of the divinity of the whole of life, but still unconscious of this? And what have we failed to understand? What insight have we missed? I leave those questions to you to answer. So the challenges facing now, and there are many. First of all, we have climate change. We have the unsustainable population growth, destined to reach 9.8 billion by 2050. We have pandemics, of which we're in the midst of one. We have species extinction, diminishing resources, unequal distribution of wealth, pollution of the planet with a sick ecosystem that we've created, threat of nuclear war, and the refugees from war, and also from the effects of climate change, which really haven't begun yet, but will be coming soon. There are three different responses. We can deny the fact that we need to change and continue as before. We can have short-term fixes, or we can have radical change to the whole system, either through conscious choice or through being forced on us by events. We don't know what's going to happen in the way of events yet. Now, the Hubble telescope has vastly expanded our understanding of the incredible size, complexity, and extent of the physical universe. And the more we learn about the true scale and scope of the universe, the more we discover its extraordinary intelligence and creativity. And the more incredible it is to say that the plan is to leave it all behind and exit, so to speak. And the more we need a new story that could free us from the limitations of the old stories and give us a more positive view of our presence on this planet and our destiny here. In the West, there are two stories which have been deeply imprinted on us that are part of the old master story, and we need to relinquish both of them before we can move into a new story. Now, I've gone into the myth of the fall in detail, but I'm mentioning it here again because in the last webinar, we saw that this myth was the deliberate creation of a powerful priesthood in 621 BC that wanted to get rid of the divine feminine as co-creator of the world. Unfortunately, it was adopted by Christianity, and it did untold harm to women who are identified with Eve, and is still doing untold harm to women. Secondly, there's the myth of a lifeless, meaningless universe that's been promoted by materialist or reductionist science. So these are the two things that I think we need to jettison as soon as possible. The separation, coming to science now, I'm going to look at, in the next few slides, look at science. The separation between spirit and nature, which was deeply embedded in Christian Europe, was transmitted to science from the 17th to the 20th centuries, when the influence of Christianity was beginning to wane. Freed from the control of the church, science began to explore the physical world and to develop rapidly into many different categories of exploration. Unfortunately, with time, science came to reject God and the soul as illusory creations of the religious or superstitious mind. It also excluded whatever it designated as non-rational, such as the survival of the soul. And the result today is that in a secular culture, which is what ours mainly is now, scientific rational man rules supreme, a hubristic one-eyed consciousness that is split off from relationship with nature and with soul, and it has no idea of what it has lost, knowing nothing of the past that I've been exploring. So we come to the ideology of materialist or reductionist science. From the late 18th century, materialist or reductionist science, which is called scientism by some, has told us that we are the only sentient beings in an inanimate universe that is without meaning, purpose, direction, or intelligence. This bleak philosophy has taken on the power and absolutism of an ideology. Life has no script, no playwright, no producer, and no meaning. That's a quote from Harvey in Homo Deus. Not necessarily what he believes, but it's what he summed up our scientific consciousness as saying. The feminine principle, quite obviously, has no place in this belief system, and the earth and her resources are viewed as subject to man. I don't know how each of you were brought up. Certainly, I wasn't brought up in that teaching science, but I think the teaching of science in schools has put that view forward, which has been really very wounding for the soul of the children listening to it. The four main tenets of scientific materialism are these. The physical material universe is the only one that exists. Consciousness begins and ends with the physical brain. When the brain dies, consciousness ceases to exist. The whole universe is basically a mechanism. It has no conscious beings in it apart from ourselves. And we as observers are separate from what we observe. Is it surprising that so many people are showing symptoms of mental illness and are driven to drugs and suicide because their life has no meaning and no value. This is the belief system that is governing most of the culture of the West at the moment. Christianity has receded into the background. So the modern master story is this: God and the soul do not exist. The highest authority is reason and the rational mind. The method of exploration is science. The master story is technological progress. The only philosophy is materialism, and matter is dead. The way of living in this whole scenario is competition and the survival of the fittest. So I brought this beautiful painting by Odilon Redon as a symbol, really, of our one-eyed consciousness that is completely cut off from nature, symbolized by the woman in that beautiful landscape. This is a cyclops, which is what we've become. Seeing all aspects of the world and the universe as separate from ourselves has led to a catastrophic loss of soul and a loss of relationship with the planetary environment. The rational mind has replaced God. This dehumanizing materialist philosophy provides no foundation for moral values, and this can be seen most clearly in the amoral behavior of the technological media giants and the giant corporations. Science and technology are dreaming of unimaginable power over life, but they have no moral boundaries to restrain them, no love of the planet and its life. Love doesn't come into it at all. So the religions of the world have taught us to believe, but they have not taught us about the marvel and divinity of our essential being and our profound relationship with the divinity of the universe. Materialist science has taught us that our potential and destiny are limited to the material universe and our present state of consciousness, although they dream of creating a kind of consciousness, a super consciousness, which would govern the whole world. Both have created a kind of prison in which we live unconsciously, believing what we are told. Why do people believe what they're told? Why do they go on believing what they're told? And this is what the Eastern religions meant by the word Maya, or illusion. And Rumi saw this centuries ago. He said, why do you stay in prison when the doors are open? Because of the influence of the myth of the fall, as well as the influence of materialist science, we have come to see ourselves as separate from the cosmos and separate from the life that surrounds and sustains us. This illusion of separation has been mainly the creation of Western science, quite unconsciously. It can't be blamed for it. But its methodology is based on an objective analysis which separates the observer from the observed. This scientific separation of the knower from the known has become deeply embedded in the ruthless politics and economics of the industrialized nations, and Trump is the epitome of this mindset. We see governments pursuing their own power-driven agendas, competing against each other, instead of serving their people and the planet, unable to grasp the need for radical change. I couldn't resist putting this in because it sums up the whole thing of the dominance of the Western mind, but particularly the dominance of America, I'm afraid. So we have Jung's warning to us, which he gave long ago. He said, as at the beginning of the Christian era, so again today we are faced with the problem of the general moral backwardness of our species, which has failed to keep pace with our scientific, technical, and social progress. And he said in another place, he said, God's powers have passed into our hands. The powers themselves are not evil, but in the hands of man they are an appalling danger, in evil hands. And here, which I've given last year actually, in my seminar series last year. This is a prophecy from the fourth Gospel of the Essenes, worth reading again, I think. There will come a day, I don't know whether this is Jesus speaking or who, but I haven't checked it out. There will come a day when the Son of Man will turn his face from his earthly mother and betray her, even denying his mother and his birthright. Then shall he sell her into slavery, and her flesh shall be ravaged, her blood polluted, and her breath smothered. He will bring the fire of death into all parts of her kingdom, and his hunger will devour all her gifts and leave in their place only a desert. Actually, it was Jesus speaking, I remember now. All these things he will do out of ignorance of the law, and as a man dying slowly cannot smell his own stench, so will the Son of Man be blind to the truth, that as he plunders and ravages and destroys his earthly mother, so does he plunder and ravage and destroy himself. For he was born of his earthly mother, and he is one with her, and all that he does to his mother, even so does he do to himself. I think that's an extraordinary summary of our position today. Now we have a modern shaman who says the Garden of Eden is no more. We have changed the world so much that scientists say we are in the new anthropological age, the Anthropocene, the age of humans. We are the most dominant and popular species on Earth, and our effect on the natural world has been catastrophic. The threat to it has never been greater than it is today. So these are the warning words of a man who has profound respect for the life of all species on Earth and their interconnectedness with each other. And when we look at the destruction of the equatorial forests of the Amazon and Indonesia, the whitening and dying of the coral reefs because of the warming oceans, the devastating fires in Australia, we can see the effects of our arrogance and hubris in relation to the Earth. But too many of us still can't see it. But there is one young woman who can. I've pictured this rather nice picture of her instead of the rather fierce ones when she's yelling at the United Nations. Climate change is forcing us to change, and the role of the Sibyl is being played by Greta Thunberg. In Greta Thunberg, we can see the ancient role of the Sibyl returning. In the past, the Sibyl warned people of the error of their ways, threatening the retribution of the gods if they didn't change them. Sometimes she stood between armies and shamed them into withdrawing from engaging in battle. Greta has listened to the scientists whose warnings are growing increasingly urgent and desperate. She's really teaching the whole world what we need to know. So I'm coming now to the second part of this talk, which is the new story. And this beautiful image is a picture of Indra's net, which really says that all living things are part of a unified field that embraces every aspect of life. At the same time, this entire field is embodied in each individual being, which the little tiny shining stars indicate of the individual and the connections between everything and everyone. What I do, therefore, affects the whole. Now, the new story is a revolutionary shift in collective thinking, the same kind of shift as when Copernicus and Galileo displaced the geocentric model of the sun and the moon revolving around the Earth. And just as our sun does not revolve around the Earth, neither does the life of the Earth revolve around our species. We are dependent on the environment that sustains us. If we destroy the environment, we destroy ourselves, and it's as simple as that. The evolution of consciousness can be divided into three main phases: lunar, solar, and stellar. I spoke in last year about the lunar and the solar era, not so much about the stellar. But we are now in a time of transition when we are moving out of the solar era and into the stellar era. We are just rediscovering that we are inseparable from the cosmos that gave us life and from the earth which sustains our life. Strangely enough, the new story comes from the science of quantum physics. Quantum physics tells us that the whole universe is a unified field, a cosmic web of life which connects all life forms in our universe. Every atom of life interacts with every other atom. None of us is therefore truly separate from others, or from other species of life on the planet, or from the life of the 100 billion galaxies of the universe, each of which, like our Milky Way galaxies, may have 100,000 million stars in it. It's simply unbelievable to grasp all this amazing change of consciousness that this new theory brings us. The new science of unified physics, as presented by Nassim Haramein, shows us that a new cosmology is being born, a new vision of our profound relationship with an intelligent, living, and interconnected universe. Now, crop circles have been showing us this for years, but they've been ridiculed and poo-pooed, saying that anybody could sort of make them in the night. But this one that I'm showing you could not possibly have been made in the night. It had 400 circles, I think, and was gigantic. And even if you'd had 100 men walking for a week, you couldn't have done it. So I'm just going to show you that one very beautiful one, which happened in England, which appeared in England. So the new story, here's another crop circle of the two triangles, which are so important, the up moving one and the down moving one, which come together as a cube in the center. The new story tells us that we have a purpose and an agenda to accomplish, and that is to carry out the will of the cosmos for this planet, to safeguard and preserve its life, to cherish every aspect of its divinity, and to grow in insight and understanding. Now, this is a summary that Jim gave of Nassim Haramein's discoveries. But I did a course with Nassim about 3 or 4 years ago in which I learned all this. And I've got, if you look on YouTube, there's a talk I gave about it, which he allowed me to put up and said it was okay. So anyway, this is what Jim said. He said 100 trillion cells in our body, 100 trillion atoms in every one of the 100 trillion cells. 1,000 billion interactions between these cells every second. In every atom, there's a proton, which is like a grain of sand compared to the size of St. Peter's. Inside each proton are Planck units, what Nassim calls Planck units. A Planck unit is so minute that the distance between it and a proton is comparable to the distance between us and Alpha Centauri. Just unbelievable. Planck units are continually oscillating, continually expanding and contracting every nanosecond in and out of the quantum vacuum. Planck units hold the entire universe together, connected with each other through wormholes. So there's no such thing as empty space. Space is completely full of Planck units, and the entire universe is apparently a black hole. We are connected to every part of the universe through these units, and our heartbeat echoes the beat of the Planck units. If that isn't incredible, I don't know what is. Just unbelievable. Now I'm bringing here a few of insights which go with this from different scientists. This is one of my favorites. The electromagnetic quantum vacuum is a form of light. It is an underlying sea of energy that permeates every tiny volume of space, from the emptiest intergalactic void to the depths of the Earth, the Sun, and our own bodies. Our world of matter is like the visible foam atop a very deep ocean of light. And this from Erwin Laszlo. Scientists now know that particles are non-locally connected with each other throughout space. Living things of all kinds are non-locally connected throughout a subtle field that scientists know exists, although they don't yet understand what it is or how it works. in this beautiful picture, and everything is connected. What's under the ground is connected with what's above the ground. Trees are connected to the cosmos, the sky, the oxygen. Everything breathes together, is what Plotinus said. And here we have two quotations from David Bohm, who is one of the greatest physicists in this country, who unfortunately wasn't recognized the way he should have been. So he said the universe is an undivided wholeness in flowing movement. And he said, we've reversed the usual classical notion that the independent elementary parts of the world are the fundamental reality, and that the various systems are merely particular contingent forms and arrangements of these parts. Rather, we say that inseparable quantum interconnectedness of the whole universe is the fundamental reality, and that relatively independent behaving parts are merely particular and contingent forms within this whole. Now, the new story gives us a new image of God or spirit. There may be no creator beyond creation. God or spirit or divine mind is the invisible ground of the entire manifest universe and the ground of our own consciousness. So divine mind is not something separate from us. We are within it, coexisting and co-creating with it. And this, to me, is one of the great revelations of our time. So we have a different concept of God or spirit which could come into being. Spirit, which is so long projected onto a transcendent creator remote from our world, is the quintessential consciousness which is awaiting discovery both in nature and ourselves. We participate in a cosmic consciousness or intelligence which is co-inherent with every atom of our being and every particle of matter. So God or spirit or divine mind is not something transcendent to us. We are co-inherent with it, at the very heart of it. And we have the extraordinary responsibility of helping spirit to become conscious at this level of reality. This is the alchemical great work, to become conscious within our soul. It's really redeeming nature from the idea that it's something not included in spirit, really. And do you remember the words in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus' words, where he said, the kingdom of heaven is spread out upon the earth and men do not see it? Well, this is what this whole thing about, changing our image of God, which so that it includes nature and the whole planet. Now, Jung said in one of his letters, he saw this, and I put this in my book, that this realization was the great realization of Jung's work, I think. The innermost self of every human and animal, of plants and crystals, is God. He saw that as we became more conscious, so God could become more incarnated within us, within our consciousness. It was a sort of two-way process of welcoming God, as it were, and growing in our consciousness to include the concept of God in our whole concept of our presence on the planet. It was a fantastic idea that he elaborated over his whole work, really. I'm not explaining it very well, I'm afraid. So this is a wonderful quote. Consciousness is fundamental in the universe, not derivative from physical matter. All of the apparent physical world exists within consciousness, and we are all manifestations of the one mind, the primordial consciousness in which all the events of the universe occur. I don't know whether you read his book, but he had an extraordinary near-death experience when he got a very dangerous, I don't know whether it was a virus or bacteria, I think bacteria, and he was taken really beyond the stage of death, and he met his sister who had either died or been killed when she was a little girl, and she showed him the world that she was living in, and he wrote a book about it. I'm not sure whether it was that book or another one. He's written 2 books. But a most amazing experience which completely changed his understanding of life and life beyond death. And here's another quote. Consciousness is ultimate reality. Physical universes and their components, including the brain, emerge from consciousness. All beings in the manifest universe are related to each other, never separate from God, nature, or any other being for an instant. So there are people on the planet who really have seen through to what really needs to come into consciousness. And they're like these tiny sparks all over the world who are bringing this new consciousness into being. And the survival of the soul is part of this new story. The materialist or reductionist science that has dominated our culture for so long has blocked off or ignored evidence of our survival beyond death. And so Eben Alexander again says, the old paradigm of birth to death represents an outdated concept that is woefully inadequate in defining the unfolding reality of expanded awareness. Materialist science is at the end of its days, as most scientists are changing their views. The old concepts are soon to be relegated to the same dustbin as the earth is flat, as we develop a more mature understanding and transcend old beliefs. He's had quite a big influence on scientists because of his experience and the way he described it for people. So the new story tells us that light and love are the foundation of our being, our consciousness and our intelligence, and our capacity for love. Instead of coming from a distant God, these are the foundation of our being, something that can't be taken away from us, that is intrinsic to our life. And it's also about relinquishing the fear of death, knowing that we survive death and that we are, in our essence, immortal beings. If only this could be conveyed to the poor people who are losing their parents and their children and their partners and people who are dying in the hospitals, the doctors and the nurses. If people knew that there's no such thing as death, it would make a huge difference to their fear and also to their grief. Now, His Holiness the Dalai Lama came up with a lovely description of religion and says, "This is my simple religion. There is no need for temples, no need for complicated philosophy. Our own brain, our own heart is our temple, and the philosophy is kindness." Now, I thought I'd include what are called the eco-theologians, since some of you may not know about them. Certainly you may know about Matthew Fox, who's still alive. I think he's 82 now. And he's written many, many books, wonderful books about Christianity. He was excommunicated by a previous pope. I can't remember which one, the one before John Paul or after John Paul. Anyway, he continued to write and to teach people and has a huge following. And he said the killing of Mother Earth in our time is the #1 ethical, spiritual, and human issue of our planet. And he has a vision of the cosmic Christ, the vision of Christ as pervading the entire cosmos, making the universe and everything in it sacred. So this is his approach to restoring the sacredness of creation and the universe. And he says the incarnation does not only refer to the life of Jesus, but to the entire created order. The divine is not separate from the universe, but pervades it, so the universe is saturated with divinity. It is held within the embrace of the divine. Now, this is extraordinary, I think, because it's really going back to the same concept put forward in the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads that I looked at in the first seminar. So you can see how the circle has gone full circle, or the circle has come to its new point, as it were, bringing up these very ancient ideas, but in a new context. So he said, Mother Earth is the cosmic Christ. These are thoughts to think about and reflect on. And Thomas Berry, one of my favorite theologians, who's a Catholic theologian living in west coast of America, I think. We need to abandon the old up and out cosmology and celebrate the grand mystery of the universe that we find ourselves in. The universe, the solar system, and planet Earth in themselves and in their evolutionary emergence constitute for the human community the primary revelation of that ultimate mystery whence all things emerge into being. The natural world is the larger sacred community to which we belong. Suddenly, we awaken to the devastation that has resulted from the entire modern process. In relation to the earth, we have been autistic for centuries. Only now have we begun to respond to the earth's demands that we cease our industrial assault, that we abandon our inner rage against the conditions of our earthly existence, and that we renew our human participation in the grand liturgy of the universe. This is from his book, beautiful book called The Dream of the Earth. I copied him in calling my book The Dream of the Cosmos. And he said, to attain peace among the nations in any dynamic or enduring form requires not simply political negotiation, but a new mode of consciousness. The magnitude of this change is in the order of religious conversion or of spiritual rebirth. A change is needed in every phase of human life. Now we come to somebody whom I didn't know very well, but I've learnt something about her. She's an extraordinary woman. What have we dared to think of our planet, and indeed the entire universe, as the body of God, which takes us straight back to Hinduism and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. The crucifixion is the abuse of the earth, the exploitation and poisoning of God's body, species extinction. We, all of us, are being called to do something unprecedented. We are being called to think about everything that is, for we now know that everything is interrelated and that the well-being of each is connected to the well-being of the whole. This suggests a planetary agenda for all the religions, all the various fields of expertise. And Barbara Marx Hubbard, whom I followed for years, and she died last year, I think, quite recently, but she was an extraordinary woman with a tremendous energy and dedication to bringing through her idea of conscious evolution, and that we are all evolution becoming conscious of itself in our own consciousness. And she made this diagram of the sacred story of creation and the wheel of co-creation in which we're all participating as this evolutionary impulse begins to gather momentum of the change of consciousness. She was absolutely extraordinary woman. I think she was 96 when she died, a very, very good age anyway. And you can find her work on the internet. Now, this is Bede Griffiths talking to Andrew Harvey in 1992, and really warning us of what we need to, what's going to happen really before we can change. He says the whole human race has now come to the moment when everything is at stake, when a vast shift of consciousness will have to take place on a massive scale in all societies and religions for the world to survive. Unless human life becomes centered on the awareness of a transcendent reality that embraces all humanity and the whole universe, and at the same time transcends our present level of life and consciousness, there is little hope for us. Very few people dare to face how extreme and decisive the situation has now become. Very few people are prepared to look without illusion at our time and see it for what it is, a crucifixion on a worldwide scale of everything humanity has expected or trusted or believed, in every level and in every arena. This was 1992, so we're now nearly 20 years beyond that, or is it 30 years? I can't work it out. 1992, 1912, I think it's 30 years. So I'm going to bring this to an end with talking about this extraordinary book written by Christopher Bede, who's helped me with these talks. And who wrote this book and was published just before Christmas in America. He wanted to call it Diamonds from Heaven, but the publisher insisted on calling it LSD and the Mind of the Universe because they thought it would sell it better. I got him to fight over that, but unfortunately he had to lose the battle and accede to their demand that it should be that title. So it is a journey, an extraordinary journey into the shamanic journey into the soul of the universe. I call it soul rather than mind, and an encounter with the divinity that lies at its heart. It's not a book that can be read easily or quickly. It's something to take very, very slowly, because it extended over 20 years, this journey, taking psychedelic drugs under very, very careful supervision and writing down exactly what happened in every single session, with a 5-year gap in the middle. So that's why I say to take it slowly, but it's a book which will really open your mind to what has never been revealed to the human species, really. Not even by the Buddha or by Jesus, although it's what they probably saw and experienced themselves. So he says, the physical universe is not a punishment or a trap into which we have fallen and from which we must be saved. It is not a spiritual wasteland we should escape from as quickly as possible. The purpose of rebirth is not to spiritually awaken and then leave the physical universe. The purpose is to awaken and become a conscious player in its continuum growth and transformation over many, many lives still. Not to cut short our time on earth and, so to speak, get out of it, but to stay and help to transform the whole process that's happening on the planet. And I'm going to read you what I think is the most wonderful passage, which I quoted in The Dream of the Cosmos, but I read again in this new book. The unified field underlying physical existence completely dissolved all boundaries. As I moved into it, all borders fell away. All appearances of division were ultimately illusory. No boundaries between incarnations, between human beings, between species, even between matter and spirit. The world of individuated existence was revealing itself to be an exquisitely diversified manifestation of a single entity. Though these experiences were extraordinary in their own right, the most poignant aspect was what my seeing and understanding them meant to the consciousness I was with. I felt that it had been waiting for billions of years for embodied consciousness to evolve to the point where we could at last begin to see, understand, and appreciate what had been accomplished. I felt the loneliness of this intelligence, having created such a masterpiece and having no one to appreciate its work. And I wept. I wept for its isolation and in awe of the profound love which had accepted this isolation as part of a larger plan. Behind creation lies a love of extraordinary proportions, and all of existence is an expression of this love. The intelligence of the universe's design is equally matched by the depth of love that inspired it. So to end, I would say that divine spirit is the core of our being, and the soul is the intermediary between spirit and body. The body is the temple of the soul, what Jesus said it was, and the means of our being able to incarnate on this planet At the same time, it is a portal that can offer us access to the many dimensions of the inner universe and the experience of the divine spirit within us, the Atman, our Buddha nature, the Tao, and the kingdom of heaven. So, to conclude, I would state unequivocally that we are immortal divine beings, part of the divinity of the universe, both visible and invisible. So thank you to all of you for being with me and for listening to these 5 webinars. They've been an extraordinary experience, an educating experience for me, illuminating experience. And I'm very grateful, having been asked by Ubiquity to do this.
Well, a big thank you to you, dear Stan. It was these 5 sessions went so quickly, and your teaching is so profound and deep, illuminating, and
Thank
beautiful.
You, yeah.
And as I was listening to your presentation, I was thinking it's almost like watching a movie of humankind. And this movie is clearly not a comedy, it's more like a drama. There are lots of positives and negative chapters in it for sure, and hopefully that the next chapter will be a better one. At least some of us, we are helping to write that positive story. And also that I'd like to add is so pleased that you mentioned Barbara Marx Hubbard. I was very fortunate working with her for so many years, and she was such an amazing lady, as you said, full of élan vital and very relatable. I remember a couple of times when she stayed with me when I was living in Paris. I remember sitting on a sofa and she was telling me about her passion to life and her romantic liaisons and all sorts of things. She was really, really amazing lady. And I picked up one of her book, this one, and I don't know well, there is no coincidence whatsoever. There was a bookmark in it, and I opened it and started to read the page, and I thought, this is just so perfect. This is fitting to your 5 presentation. If you allow me, I'd like to read Barbara's words to you. And this is in page 33, the evolutionary spiral chapter. This is what she said. From the perspective of the new story of creation, the great mystics who founded the world's religions are embodiments of different aspects of the future human. At least one visionary mystic or leader patterned each culture and cultivated specific qualities. We now need to realize the next stage of our evolution, the mindfulness of Buddha, the Tao or way of Lao Tzu, the yoga of the Hindus, the love of God, the law of the Jewish people, the faith and obedience to Allah of the Muslim people, the understanding of community and earth of native peoples and the goddess traditions of prehistoric times, and Jesus' promise of radical personal transformation through love of God and of the other as oneself. All these qualities and many others may be seen as evolutionary potentials in us. One of the great values of knowing our story is to remember the amazing capacity of evolution to create new forms out of old. We can see our spiral as one continuous process of transformation. Each turning point on the spiral represents a breakthrough in consciousness and freedom. We can see the appearance of great religions when sensitive humans were touched by the fire of spirit at the core of the spiral, coming in contact directly with the designing intelligence running through the whole process. We see the core of the spiral as spirit in action, the unmanifest manifesting in form, pressing each being to fulfill its potential, and now breaking through in the minds of millions of humans, ready to more fully express spirit in action in our own lives. I'm getting the goosebumps.
Yes, that's perfect. She's probably listening in, I hope.
Yes, yes. Wow, well, let's turn to our audience. Actually, before I forget, you can watch Anne's long journey to a new story, 4 sessions webinar she delivered to us last year on our YouTube channel. If I kindly ask Georg, he may put the link in the chat, but anyway, let's turn to our audience and see who would like to contribute. Right, Annika. Let's hear from Annika, then from Paolo. Okay, Annika is coming in. Hi, Annika. Great to see you.
Hi, Annika.
You're still muted at the moment.
There. Can you hear me? So thank you for this course, Anne. It's been amazing. I've learned so much, both from this course and the one last year. And I've just finished your book, and I don't think I've ever put so many sticky notes in a book. So my question is to really shift into this new story that's so hopeful. How can we capitalize on this sort of undercurrent of spirituality that's sort of apart from religion, where people are looking for more experiential versus belief experiences? And if there's a tipping point or a critical mass for that to actually manifest and break through to the political level, that's really been hijacked by all these solar steeped big egos. And also how you see the coronavirus playing into this. I see it as a great potential, but also as a risk that these authoritarian leaders may try to go for more power grabs. I'd love your input on how we can kind of move towards this on a political level as well.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the coronavirus, because I think what's happening is that the whole of humanity has experienced the same thing, which is drawing us all together. Secondly, all the doctors and nurses are discovering their true vocation, which is to love, because they are truly, truly loving the patients whose lives they're trying to save. And it's taking it up a level from normal care in the hospitals. It really is, because the pressure is so great on these poor doctors and nurses. They're practically on their last gasp of exhaustion. So it's drawing the very best out of humanity in this sense. And it's also drawing all of us together, because we are all concerned for our parents, our children, our partners, whatever close relatives we have. We're worried that this may take them away from us without saying goodbye. So death comes as a sudden axe, as it were, between life and death. And there's nothing we can do about it. We can't visit them in hospital. So there's a big shift there about the opening of the heart. And I think that's what this virus is doing. It's really opening the heart of the whole world. And it's bringing us closer together, because we're all sharing the same experience. It's not different for Christians, Muslims, Hindus, or whatever. We're all sharing the fact we have to take care, we have to do what the governments say. There is a danger of a totalitarian shift and control, but we can deal with that later. And as for what to do and how to accelerate this process, each person has to follow their own life path and see what they really want to contribute in the way of what they're able to contribute. I mean, the nurses and doctors are contributing what they are, and the interviews on the television between different people in different situations are absolutely fascinating, because they show all the facets of our humanity, and they show how very intelligent we are, and how sensitive we are, and how sort of wise in a way, and compassionate. So that's, people have never been interviewed on television like this. It's something completely new, right across the spectrum of society. So that is, again, drawing us together, and it's making, what's happening is government is having to speak to us, which it never did before. We have nightly sessions of being told what's going on and whether this has to, how long this has to go on for. Before, we were just told government's doing this, that, and the other, but it's more or less none of your business. You just get on with your lives and keep quiet. But they really are engaging with the public in quite a different way from what they have done before. And we've got our Prime Minister in the hospital in intensive care, which hopefully he's improving now. But the whole nation has been really wishing him and wanting to be well. And there's been quite a, as I was saying to Georgie before, there's a fascinating panic that what will we do without a leader? What will we do? Where will we find another leader if this one goes? Panic. But this is all part of the story that's unfolding now. But I think that even Trump has been halted in his tracks. He's saying all the wrong things and being very stupid in some ways, but he's trying to respond in his own way to the situation. And I think this will happen with other leaders. I mean, China is now trying to justify itself and hide the fact that the things started there. Things are going to radically have to change in order to prevent future pandemics. China is going to have to come into line of stopping people buying this kind of animal meat that may be infected and everything. Things will have to be done, which are going to affect the whole world by removing the threat of another pandemic. And that in itself is progress in a way. People coming together, all countries coming together to compare notes and say, why is Germany so much better than England in saving lives? Or why is South Korea more efficient than whatever, France or something? You know, they're coming together, comparing notes and looking at things. And all that is very positive, I think. I don't know what's going to come out of it, but I do know that this is an alchemical transformation, a descent into the underworld. And it's there's much more probably to come, not necessarily a pandemic, but other things to do with climate change. And if Kim Jong-un sets off one of his nuclear weapons, that will be another thing. And, you know, there are all sorts of unknowns ahead of us. You just have to respond in your own way, with your own heart, in your own community. Community is very important. That's something that's coming to the fore. The people looking after each other and asking what they can do to help. I don't know if I've answered.
I think that's a very inspiring answer, and that what I hadn't thought about. I thought about that we're all one, and really shows that we're on one planet with environmentally. But what you said about opening the heart, maybe it's on a really massive level, so we can go from that one-eyed view to using both our eyes, so we can really see what's happening.
Both our eyes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Annika. Thank you. Paolo?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anne. That's been amazing. It feels like you are a fountain of wisdom I would never stop drinking from. And my mind is limited, but my heart resonating a lot. So I'll try to maybe try and focus on two questions I'd like to ask. One is kind of related to the one asked by Annika, I think, but let's see what you would like to say. So if Mother Earth has a soul, and that soul is in each and every one of us, and now more than ever with the COVID crisis, and the story can be rewritten, what would be the first step that we could take to rewrite the story? So this is the first question. I'll ask the second one later.
Yeah, that's a good idea because my memory is not good. So I think that I was just reading today that in this country, renewable energy has overtaken fossil fuels for the first time. 44% of our energy is coming from renewables for the first time. So that means that fossil fuels are diminishing in this, you know, in the general use of fossil fuels. This may be the way that we can accelerate the development of renewable energy and gradually, or rather rapidly, diminish our dependence on fossil fuels. So that's just one aspect. I really can't answer it because there's so many things that could happen, that might happen, that depend on individuals. And Jung, I always remember what Jung said. He said the world hangs on a single thread, and that thread is the psyche of the individual. What we do affects the whole. So if one individual has a brilliant idea, which can change our relationship with the planet, that will affect the whole community of the planet. And does that answer your question more or less?
Yeah, it does. And also makes me make the link with something maybe you said last year about the 1% of population.
Yes, I was reading that today. I was listening to that. You asked me that question, and I said that Ken Wilber had said if we 1%, which was 750 million, I think, a year ago, that would shift it. Just that's what the Maharishi said as well. He said that we just need a certain amount of people meditating, and that can shift the whole loaf, so to speak. It'd be like the leaven that raises the whole loaf.
Thank you. And so that also connects with I think a global meditation that has occurred some days ago. That hopefully maybe it has helped.
Also, so, I see that Amy mentioned the ceasefire that the UN is pressing for, which many people have signed. So that's another example. There's also another one for nuclear weapons to be banned. Both the English and the European nuclear weapons to start with. So that's another aspect. I have also a friend of mine called Scylla Elworthy, who is raising money to have, she calls it a business plan for peace. And it's really getting all the people to work who are engaged in business to refocus their attention on a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, marvelous plan.
That's going very well.
Yeah.
Second question?
Yeah, second question. And so second question is very much a synchronicity thing. 2 days ago, I was meditating on trying to, what I wrote, just a second. Yeah, I was meditating around my purpose of a dear project I have, and a symbol came to me very vividly. And that symbol is contained in the crop circle you showed us before. It's a triangle with a circle at the center. And so I was wondering whether you were aware of any link between that that circle and the triangle and maybe the intranet.
No, I don't know of any specific thing, but that double triangle has always been a symbol of spirit and matter joined together, union of spirit and matter.
Yeah, what I got is just one triangle. So I saw that your crop circle had two, but mine was one triangle with three lines here and a circle at the center. And so I was extremely vivid, and I'm still playing with it to come up with a framework that has to do with the integration of mind, soul, and body, or basically more strategy, action, and wisdom. And so, I mean, just want to share that with you and everyone on the call. And if you had anything to say about it, I'll be delighted.
Yeah, well, I think you must write it, paint it, or draw it anyway. Make a big drawing of it. Put it up on your wall and look at it and think about it. And ask it to guide you. Okay. Right. I would do a bigger one, but that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's like a diamond, isn't it?
Yeah, a candle light. And you also spoke about candle lights. So
okay. So
thank you from all my heart.
Thank you for your questions. I always look forward to hearing
them. Thank you, Paolo. Well, we only have time for another maybe couple of questions. In case we are not able to answer your questions, you feel free to email Anne. Also, thank you, Georg, for putting the link in the chat section for Anne's last year presentation. Now, there is a question here from Vivian. Please ask Anne to address the Pentecost.
Pentecost. We're a long way from, we're at Easter, not Pentecost now. Pentecost comes in June, I think. Pentecost is the descent of the Holy Spirit, the feminine Holy Spirit.
Okay, Vivian, that's it then. Now, there is another question I saw earlier. Maybe this is a big one. Can you tell us how you would define the feminine principle?
You'll have to read my book, chapter 10.
Okay, Carrie, that's your answer. All right, and then from Margot, why of what Houston Smith called the 7 revealed religions did you choose Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Christianity, and not the 3 others?
Because of I'm not attracted to the others. And I said last time, Islam would be too dangerous to tackle. Judaism, I don't feel attracted to. And what would be the other one? It would be lovely to do one on the indigenous beliefs, particularly the American and the Australian indigenous peoples. But I just chose those ones because I know most about them, because having traveled through those regions, I really was steeped in Hinduism and Buddhism when I was traveling, and Taoism as well.
Mm.
And I was able to talk to people and learn a lot and read books and actually have my feet on the ground that the ancient sages walked on, except that I wasn't able to go to China. But I went to Taiwan and I saw those marvelous treasures from the Chinese museum there. So I was sort of steeped in those particular cultures. Christianity has always bothered me, and my mother had messages during the war, and which are on my website, by the way, under channeled messages. And they said, study the early period of Christianity and see what went wrong. So that's what I've done, really. So that's been my life work. So that was why I was drawn to speak about Christianity. And I think that really sums it up for me. And I have no desire to go any further. I've learned a lot, and I now perhaps need to do. I'm going to be writing about the Shekinah again for the Chartres meeting in August, I think, and also possibly Mary Magdalene. So I've done a lot of work on Mary Magdalene, which is on my playlist on my website. I've written a long article, an illustrated talk about her.
Yes. Now, Amy says that she would like to offer a prayer. How would you like to offer that, Amy? Do you want to, shall we open your video and audio settings? Do you want to do that? We have another couple of minutes. Okay, cool.
There we go. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay. Oh, I see. I just entered a SoundCloud recording. So the prayer is something that I wrote at Chartres some years back, and it seems very appropriate. So I just offer that for your, I put the link to the SoundCloud.
Okay. All right, that's all. All right, Amy, thank you very much for that. Thank you, Amy. Before, I would like to, I think it's respectful and would be the best way to conclude this webinar. I'd like to quote from a book. This is actually the second time I do that because I love this book. Plus Anne is mentioned in it. This is Happel's book, The Mysticism, a Study and Ontology. I found this quote, which I thought I'd like to offer it to you as conclusion or end note, and the final words I would like to turn to Anne. So this is what it says. To know, to understand is not enough. The deep spirit of man craves for something more, for something which has been given many names: salvation, redemption, eternal life, the kingdom of heaven, union with God. A lonely being contained in the brief span between birth and death. As a material entity, he is only an insignificant bundle of atoms in a vast, frightening, impersonal universe, soon to return to dust and be known no more. Yet he fears that he is more than this. He is conscious of a spark within him, of himself as an image, perhaps more than an image, of divinity, of an undivided unity from which he is separated and to which he longs to return. He may forget for a time that he is a king's son, forget the pearl he was sent down to Egypt to find, forget the glorious robe which once he wore in his Father's kingdom, and be sunk in a sleep of spiritual oblivion. But the divine light is there within him and cannot forever be quenched. Not only has mysticism its found in what is the raw material of all religion, but also all the most profound insights of religious truth have their origin in a mystical experiences of those who have led the spiritual progress of the human race. Not only have they received a vision of a reality which is beyond that of space-time, they have also found a way from separation to union, a way of timeless life. Now I would like to turn to you, dear Anne, for the concluding words. And before I do that, I would like to say a big thank you to Georg for facilitating these 5 webinars. All of you, dear attendees, and please stay in touch with us. We have amazing webinars, neuroscience actually starting next Thursday. And a big thank you to you, dear Anne. Thank you for teaching us, loving us, caring for us. Now, to you.
Well, thank you for offering this opportunity to connect and communicate, because that's what people need. As the Dalai Lama says, we are social beings and we need to communicate. And so I've enjoyed communicating with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe and well, and see you soon. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.